Private armies, militias, or guns for hire are nothing new to war. They've been around for centuries, but few are as infamous as the Blackwater security firm during the War on Terror, being linked to and accused of multiple war crimes and operating so secretly that even members of the US Congress would struggle to get information about their operations in the Middle East, being one of the biggest players during the first decade of the War on Terror, allowing for easy profits to be made in the second most expensive war in history, helping them bring in over $1 billion from government contracts. Founded by former US Navy SEAL Erik Prince, the company was growing exponentially, offering security to diplomats in the Middle East. That was until Blackwater operators took part in a deadly shootout in 2007 and everything changed. When the news broke, everyone turned on Blackwater, calling them war profiteers and merchants of death, leading to the company no longer existing just a few years later. Whilst Erik Prince may describe his company and their operations as a noble cause, protecting those in need, others might not be so flattering in their descriptions of him or Blackwater. And with Erik Prince finding his way back into the political scene after being banned from entering the Pentagon and CIA, by working to negotiate deals to manage and deport illegal US immigrants, it's worth knowing the full story of Erik Prince and Blackwater, the world's most powerful mercenaries. Founded by Erik Prince and friend Al Clark in 1997, Blackwater started as an idea for a training ground whilst Erik was still in the Navy SEALs. Following the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which led to some graphic wars and war crimes being committed in the now former state of Yugoslavia. Wars that some in the high ranks and specialist units of the US military believed could have been prevented, had the US started and maintained a small peacekeeping force, to be sent in for situations just like this. But with the Cold War having ended, the US had started cutting its military budgets, meaning the ability to have a peacekeeping force just wasn't a possibility. The budget cuts were so severe that the military was struggling to even train the units it currently had, with special units like the Navy SEALs that Erik was a part of, struggling to find locations to train as well. With Erik once saying that soldiers from different units and branches basically stacked themselves on top of one another at shooting ranges. So with Erik seeing a gap in the market, he also saw an opportunity to fill it. In 1997, Blackwater would be born in North Carolina, when Erik and Al purchased 7,000 acres, turning what was a swamp into a shooting range, training ground, and military country club for soldiers and special forces to come to and practice their craft. It wouldn't take long for them to see success with their idea either, with it quickly becoming the largest shooting ground in the US and bringing in over $400,000 in its first year. And as far as Erik and Al saw, this was as far as they would take the idea. A training ground for soldiers in the military with no plans of them having their own private force or shipping their own units overseas. At least that was the plan until the attacks on 9/11. Blackwater's first government contract of significance would come in the year 2000, when they would provide counter-terrorism training to sailors in the Navy following the USS Cole bombing. But 9/11 is where the importance of Blackwater would skyrocket with the introduction of the War on Terror. US officials were looking for any way they could to strike back following the attacks, and they came up with a retaliation plan called Operation Enduring Freedom. The story goes that there were important and notorious officials in Afghanistan who had some bad reputations that the CIA needed. However, being the CIA with all their government connections and restrictions in America, they couldn't contact these individuals directly due to any backlash that could come from it. Restrictions that Blackwater, being a private company, wouldn't have. So Blackwater put the CIA in contact with what they deemed to be some of the most important and useful people in Afghanistan so the CIA could do their work. This help from Blackwater for the CIA showed them just how much these private companies would be able to help in their war on terror. Whilst Erik would say the decision to help the CIA and put them in contact with certain individuals wasn't intended with future business in mind, it definitely helped either way. The CIA began to construct bases all across Afghanistan, but didn't have the manpower to guard them or provide security. So they offered a contract to private companies to guard the bases and check any people and vehicles wanting to enter the compounds. And since a lot of Blackwater's customers were in the special forces with just the right training for the job, they were able to win their first contract in the Middle East, the first of many to come over the following years. After the US invasion of Iraq and collapse of the Iraqi government, a man called Paul Bremer was elected to a position called the Coalition Provisional Authority, and was tasked with the job of helping to rebuild the country, essentially becoming a dictator installed by the US government in Iraq, making him the most powerful man in the country overnight. And being so important to the US in rebuilding Iraq the way they wanted, he was also very important to those still fighting against the US. According to Paul Bremer himself, the US Secret Service had done a survey on his security, and had labelled him as the most threatened American official in the world. The Pentagon was starting to get stretched a bit thin, however, and was looking to outsource the $21 million security contract to someone else, and who better to award it to than Blackwater. The Blackwater military was started with a 36-man army and 3 small helicopters, paying each PMC on average over $200,000 per year, roughly 4 times more than your average US Special Forces salary. Reports state that Bremer was so hated by Iraqi insurgents that bounties of $30,000 had been put on delivery of a body for each Blackwater guard protecting him. After all the work had been done, however, Bremer was safe and unharmed, leaving Blackwater with the best possible reputation they could get, and in no time they were guarding just about every US official abroad. They began to take on bigger and bigger contracts for the US Department of Defense and CIA, spreading their reputation even further in the political space of DC. Over time, Blackwater would become the most important tool for the US in their war on terror, putting around 1,000 contractors in Iraq alone. Once near the mountains of Pakistan, US troops were caught in a firefight lasting multiple days, running almost completely dry of ammunition. With the area they were fighting in being considered too dangerous, the US government was unable to give the go-ahead to provide a plane to drop more ammo. So instead they asked Blackwater, and as soon as they could get it done, a plane was filled with ammo and dropped to the troops free of charge. No votes, no bureaucracy, no risk assessment. In an instant, Blackwater took the job and delivered. After a few more of these jobs, Blackwater and the US made their relationship official, and Blackwater was awarded a contract worth over $30 million. In one contract, they earned more than all their previous contracts combined. In times of war, companies like Blackwater are necessary. In a life or death situation, action needs to be taken in an instant, something that branches of government aren't always able to provide because of rules and regulations that they have to follow, something that a private entity like Blackwater isn't always restricted by. Erik Prince never saw himself or Blackwater as a replacement for the military. He saw Blackwater instead as an enhancement, to be there to fill in the gaps and speed up the processes wherever he could. When restrictions and bureaucracy got in the way of action from the Department of Defense, Blackwater would step in to take their place and complete the job for them. Following the resupply contracts, Blackwater's profits began to skyrocket. They began to expand everywhere, acquiring another trading facility in 2006, which is still in operation today, along with taking contracts all across the world. In 2003 to 2004, it's reported that Blackwater grew around 400%. Coincidentally, at the same time, government contract spending increased as well. The government's contract spending increased so much that it's estimated in 2005 that 40 cents of every dollar the government spent was given to private contracts, with the Department of Defense being one of the biggest spenders. A good thing for Blackwater, until they began to see the downside of having all your money come from one customer. In September 2007, an event in Nisour Square, Iraq, would mark the beginning of the end for Blackwater. A car bomb exploded just before noon on September 16th near the Nisour Square, where officials from the US and Iraq were meeting, leading to a team of 19 PMCs from Blackwater responding and taking up positions along the south side of the Nisour Square to help provide and secure an evacuation route for the officials and another Blackwater team that was providing security at the time. A Blackwater commander called Jimmy Watson had been ordered to stand by and stay in the green zone. However, he made a tactical decision to advance after waiting. He'd been ordered to return to the green zone, however after entering the square, he was ordered to lock down the traffic to help speed up the evacuation. Shortly after taking up their positions in the square, Blackwater troops began firing on civilians in response to an approaching car. 17 people died and 20 more were injured. Whilst the Blackwater troops stated that they responded in defense of an attack, the Iraqi government and Iraqi investigators determined that the killings were unprovoked. The Iraqi government later vowed to punish Blackwater, and Blackwater's license to operate in the country would be temporarily revoked. According to the Washington Post, a report from the military would seem to agree with the Iraqi government of Blackwater's attacks being unprovoked, something that the FBI would agree with later following their own investigation, deeming that at least 14 of the 17 people killed were seemingly shot without cause. 4 of the Blackwater troops were later charged and convicted, but were eventually pardoned by Donald Trump in 2020. In an instant, Blackwater became hated across the US, with lawsuits coming in from everywhere and 24/7 coverage from media outlets criticising them every chance they got. They attempted to rebrand to help distance themselves from their previous controversies, but it didn't work as well as intended, and the company was put up for sale in 2010, being valued at less than it was in 2004. Whilst the company may have had a drastic fall from grace, one thing that can't be denied was their effectiveness, because nobody, whilst under the protection of Blackwater, was injured or lost their life. Companies like Blackwater and other private military contractors operate in a very grey area, because whilst they can quite easily get carried away and get out of hand in their operations at times, their effectiveness at providing the service they're hired for is unmatched, and something that even the US Department of Defense can struggle to keep up with at times.